They say that silence is golden, but in my line of work, silence is usually where the bodies are buried. It is in the silence that the truth hides, festering like an infection beneath a bandage. For 35 years, I have worked in the records division of the Chicago Police Department. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am 59 years old, and to most people, I am just the woman in the basement who manages the archives, the one who smells faintly of old paper and dust. I am invisible. I am the person you walk past without seeing. But what people forget is that the archivist sees everything. I know which officers buried evidence in 1998. I know which politician paid off a hit-and-run victim in 2005. I hold the city's darkest secrets in cardboard boxes stacked on metal shelves. I never thought I would have to use those secrets. I never thought I would have to weaponize my invisibility. Not until the winter of 2023, when the silence I feared most came from my own daughter. This is not a story about the law. The law is a rigid, cold machine that often breaks the very people it is sworn to protect. This is a story about justice. And as I learned the hard way, justice is something you sometimes have to take with your own two hands, especially when the person you love most is being erased, bit by bit, by a man who thinks he is untouchable. Before the nightmare began, my life was defined by the sound of a cello. My daughter, Maya, was a musician. From the time she was 6 years old, our small bungalow in the Rogers Park neighborhood was filled with the deep, resonant hum of her music. Maya was vibrant, a creature of color and sound. She laughed with her whole body. She wore bright scarves and vintage coats. She saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Raising her alone after my husband passed away was the hardest and most rewarding thing I ever did. We were a team. We were survivors. Then came the gala. It was a charity event for the arts. One of those high society functions where the champagne flows like water and the air smells of expensive perfume and old money. Maya was performing with her quartet. That was where she met Julian Thorne. Julian was 34, 8 years older than Maya. He was an investment banker, a partner at one of the top firms in the Loop. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way, impeccably tailored suits, a jawline that could cut glass, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He swept Maya off her feet with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. He sent her exotic orchids instead of roses. He took her to private viewings at the Art Institute. He treated her like a rare artifact that he had acquired. I tried to be happy for her. Every mother wants her child to be secure, to be loved. But from the first time I met Julian for dinner at a steakhouse downtown, I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. It was the same instinct that flared up when I read a police report that didn't add up. He ordered for her. It was a small thing. The waiter came, and before Maya could speak, Julian closed her menu and said, "She will have the salmon, sauce on the side, and bring us a bottle of the Cabernet." Maya just smiled, a little blush on her cheeks. "He takes such good care of me, Mom," she said later. "He knows exactly what I like, but he didn't ask." That was the crack in the foundation, the first hairline fracture that would eventually bring the whole house down. They were married 6 months later in a lavish ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. It was beautiful, picture perfect, but as I watched my daughter walk down the aisle, I realized she wasn't wearing her signature bright colors. She was wearing a dress Julian had chosen, a sleek, modern, severe gown that looked more like a costume than a wedding dress. And she wasn't playing her cello. Julian had suggested she take a break from performing to focus on setting up their new home. The isolation didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical erosion, like water dripping on a stone. First, they moved into a penthouse in the Gold Coast, miles away from my humble neighborhood. Then came the excuses. Sunday dinners, which had been our sacred tradition for decades, became infrequent. "We are busy, Mom," Maya would say over the phone, her voice sounding thin and strained. "Julian has a business trip. We have a gala to attend. I have a headache." When I did see her, she was different. The color had drained out of her. She wore neutrals: beige, gray, cream. Her hair, once wild and curly, was straightened and pulled back into a tight chignon. She looked polished. She looked expensive. She looked like a trophy, and she was always checking her phone. The first time I saw the mark, it was October. The Chicago wind was starting to pick up, cutting through the streets with icy fingers. I had insisted on meeting Maya for coffee near her apartment. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and a high-necked cashmere sweater. She looked fragile, like a bird with hollow bones. We sat in the corner of the coffee shop, and when she reached for her latte, her sleeve rode up. I saw it. A cluster of dark, purple bruises on her forearm, shaped distinctly like fingers. A grip, a hard, violent grip. My stomach dropped to the floor. I reached out and grabbed her hand. "Maya?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is that?" She yanked her hand back, as if I had burned her. She pulled the sleeve down aggressively. "It's nothing," she said, her voice sharp. I bumped into the kitchen island. "You know how clumsy I am." "You have never been clumsy in your life," I said, my voice rising. "You are a cellist. You have the most precise hands I have ever seen. Julian did this to you, didn't he?" "Shh. Mom, stop. You're making a scene." "I don't care about the scene. I care about you. Maya, look at me." She wouldn't. She stared into her coffee cup, her shoulders hunched. "Mom, please. You don't understand. Julian is under a lot of pressure right now. The market is volatile. He gets stressed. He didn't mean to. I provoked him. I was nagging him about his mother coming to visit, and I just wouldn't shut up. It was my fault." I felt a wave of nausea. It was the script. The universal script of the abused. It was the same story I had read in thousands of police reports filed away in the basement of the precinct. I provoked him. It was an accident. He loves me. It won't happen again. "Maya," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Love does not leave bruises. Love does not make you afraid to speak." She stood up abruptly. "I have to go. Julian is expecting me for lunch." "Maya, wait!" But she was gone, disappearing into the gray crowd of the Chicago streets. I sat there alone, my cold coffee sitting like sludge in my stomach, realizing that my daughter was drowning, and I was standing on the shore screaming into the wind. The months that followed were a blur of anxiety and helplessness. I tried everything. I called her daily, but she rarely answered. When she did, the conversations were short and robotic. I went to the precinct and spoke to a detective I had known for 20 years, a good man named Miller. Miller listened to me, rubbing his tired eyes. "Evelyn, you know the drill," he said gently. "Without a formal complaint from her, without her cooperation, our hands are tied. We can't arrest a man because his mother-in-law has a bad feeling, especially not a man like Julian Thorne. He has lawyers who cost more an hour than I make in a month." "I know," I snapped, "but I know what I saw." "Keep a log," Miller advised. "Document everything, and be ready. Because usually, these guys escalate, and when she's ready to run, she's going to need you to be the landing pad." So I waited. And I dug. I spent my nights in the archives, long after everyone else had gone home. I searched for Julian Thorne. On the surface, he was clean. No criminal record, no traffic violations, a pillar of the community. But I knew where to look for the things that had been swept under the rug. I looked for sealed records. I looked for cross-references in old domestic disturbance calls in the affluent districts. And I found it, 10 years ago. A 911 call from a penthouse in the Loop, a woman named Sarah Jenkins. The responding officers noted a broken nose and a dislocated shoulder. No charges were filed. The report noted that the victim declined to prosecute and stated she fell down the stairs. The name of the boyfriend at the residence? Julian Thorne. He had done this before, and he had gotten away with it. I tracked Sarah Jenkins down. It wasn't easy. She had changed her name and moved to Wisconsin. I didn't contact her. I didn't want to drag her trauma back to the surface. But knowing she existed gave me a terrifying clarity. Julian was not just a stressed husband. He was a serial abuser. He was a predator who thrived on control. Winter deepened. The snow piled up on the sidewalks, turning gray and slushy. The silence from Maya became deafening. She missed Christmas. She sent a text saying they were skiing in Aspen, but I checked the flight logs, a perk of my job, and saw no tickets in their names. They were in the penthouse. He was keeping her there, The breaking point came in February. It was a Tuesday night, freezing cold. My phone rang at 2 a.m. "Mom?" The voice was barely a whisper, broken by sobs. "Maya? Maya? Where are you?" "I'm in the bathroom," she gasped. He went crazy. "Mom." I made a pasta dish he didn't like. He threw the plate against the wall. Then she couldn't finish the sentence. "Did he hit you?" I asked, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Yes. He choked me, Mom," I thought. I thought I was going to die. I saw stars. "Listen to me, Maya. Get out of the house, now." "I can't." He took my keys. He locked the front door from the inside and hid the passkey. "I'm trapped. He's asleep now, but if he wakes up..." "Okay, listen, I'm coming. I'm coming to get you." "No." "Mom, he has a gun. He bought it last month. He says it's for protection, but he keeps it on the nightstand. If you come here, he might hurt you." "I don't care." "I care. Mom, please. Just help me figure out a way." The call cut off. The battery died, or she hung up in fear. I sat on the edge of my bed, shaking. Panic is a useless emotion. Panic gets people killed. I forced myself to breathe. I forced the archivist brain to take over. I needed a plan. I couldn't just storm in there. If he had a gun and was unstable, this could end in a hostage situation or a murder-suicide. I needed leverage. I needed to neutralize him before I even walked through the door. I got dressed. I put on my heaviest coat. I drove to the precinct, but not to the front desk. I went to the archives. I pulled the file on the 2013 incident with Sarah Jenkins. I made a copy. Then I pulled another file. A much more sensitive file. You see, Julian Thorne wasn't just an abuser. Men like him, men who need that much control, usually think they are above the law in every aspect of their lives. A few months prior, the Financial Crimes Unit had been investigating a money laundering scheme involving several high-profile firms. The investigation was stalled because of political pressure, but the raw data, the preliminary wiretaps, the surveillance photos, they were all in a box marked pending in my section. I knew Julian was involved. I had seen his name on the periphery of the documents. I spent 3 hours that night connecting the dots. I found transfers to offshore accounts. I found emails that were coded but obvious to anyone looking for dirt. I built a dossier. Not just of a wife-beater, but of a felon. At 6 a.m., I drove to the Gold Coast. The sun was just starting to bleed gray light over Lake Michigan. The doorman tried to stop me, but I flashed my CPD badge, a civilian badge, but it looks official enough to a civilian, and told him I was there on an emergency family matter. He let me up. I stood outside the heavy mahogany door of the penthouse. I could hear nothing. I rang the bell. I kept my finger on the button. Finally, the door swung open. Julian stood there. He was wearing a silk robe, looking annoyed but composed. "Evelyn," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Where is my daughter?" I asked, stepping into the foyer. "She's sleeping. She's not feeling well. You need to leave." I pushed past him. He grabbed my arm. His grip was iron strong. I said, "Leave, Evelyn. You are trespassing. Or do you want me to call the police? I have the commissioner on speed dial." I laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. "Go ahead, Julian. Call him. I'm sure he'd love to see what I have in my bag." I shook his hand off and walked into the living room. It was pristine, minimalist, cold. But I saw the patch of freshly painted drywall near the kitchen where the plate had hit. "Maya!" I yelled. Bedroom door opened. Maya stumbled out. When I saw her, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her neck was covered in a thick woolen scarf, even though it was warm inside. One of her eyes was swollen shut, the skin turning a sickly shade of purple and black. Her lip was split. She looked like a ghost of the girl I raised. "Mom," she whimpered. Julian strode into the room, positioning himself between us. He crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. He looked at me like I was a cockroach he needed to crush. "Look at her," Julian said, gesturing to Maya. "She's hysterical. She fell in the shower. She's been drinking. You know how she gets." He was rewriting reality in real time. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I didn't see a powerful banker. I saw a small, pathetic, frightened boy who needed to break things to feel big. "Get your things, Maya," I said calmly. "She's not going anywhere," Julian sneered. He took a step toward me. "And neither are you, old lady. You think you can just waltz in here and take my wife? You have no idea who you are dealing with. I can ruin you. I can have your pension revoked. I can have you thrown in a cell so deep you'll never see the sun again. What are you going to do about it?" He smiled then. That twisted, arrogant smile. He crossed his arms tighter, leaning down to intimidate me. That was the moment. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I took out my cell phone. I snapped a picture of him. He blinked, confused. "What are you doing?" I captured him perfectly. The sneer, the aggression in his stance, the background of his expensive, sterile prison. And right behind him, in the blurry distance, Maya, huddled and beaten. "I'm sending a text," I said. He laughed. "To who? Your sewing circle?" "To Detective Miller, and to the chief of the Financial Crimes Division, and to the FBI field office contact I've known since 1995. I tapped the screen. Sent. Attached to the message was the photo of him standing over me, but also the digital scans of the Sarah Jenkins police report and the 3 most incriminating documents from the money laundering file I had uncovered. The caption read, "Domestic assault in progress. Suspect is Julian Thorne." Also attached, evidence regarding the encrypted offshore accounts connected to the Titan case. He is a flight risk. I looked at Julian. "It's done." "What's done?" "You're bluffing. You're just a dusty old secretary." 30 seconds later, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was his boss. He ignored it. Then it rang again. His lawyer. Then the landline rang. Then the siren. It started low, a distant wail in the city canyons, but it grew louder, closer. Julian went to the window. He looked down. His face went pale. The arrogance drained out of him like water from a cracked vase. 6 squad cars. Not just patrol. Unmarked units. He turned to me, his eyes wide with terror. "What did you do?" "I did what the system couldn't do fast enough," I said softly. "I burned your world down." He lunged for the bedroom, presumably for the gun or a passport. "Don't," I warned. "They are already in the elevator." The pounding on the door shook the walls. "Police! Open up!" Julian looked at Maya. "Baby, tell them it's a mistake. Tell them you fell." Maya looked at him. She touched her swollen eye. She looked at me, standing there in my old coat, immovable as a mountain. She didn't say a word. She just walked over to me and took my hand. The police broke the door in. It was a chaotic swirl of motion vests, guns, shouting. Detective Miller was the first one through. He saw Julian. He saw Maya's face, and his jaw set in a hard line. "Julian Thorne, you are under arrest." They cuffed him. He was screaming about his rights, about suing everyone, about how we were lying. But as they dragged him out, past the neighbors who had gathered in the hallway, he looked small, he looked finished. I wrapped my coat around Maya. "Let's go home," I said. The drive back to Rogers Park was silent. Maya stared out the window at the frozen lake. When we got to my house, the house she grew up in, she walked into her old room. Her cello was still there in the corner, covered in a layer of dust. She sat on the bed and finally, she wept. It wasn't a gentle cry. It was a guttural, primal release of pain and shame and relief. I held her until the sun was fully up and the coffee pot had gone cold. You might think the story ends there. The bad guy goes to jail, the hero wins, and everyone lives happily ever after. But real life isn't a movie. The aftermath was a war of attrition. Julian was denied bail because of the financial crimes and the flight risk evidence I had provided. His assets were frozen. His firm fired him publicly to distance themselves from the scandal. But even from a cell, he tried to hurt us. His parents hired a team of sharks for his defense. They launched a smear campaign against Maya. They called her unstable, a gold digger, a liar. They tried to say I had fabricated the evidence. For months, we lived in the trenches of the legal system. I had to testify. Maya had to testify. She had to sit on a stand and recount every humiliation, every blow, while Julian stared at her from the defense table with cold, dead eyes. There were days when Maya wanted to give up. "It's too hard, Mom," she would say, curling up on the sofa. "Maybe I should just drop the assault charges. Let them get him on the fraud. It's enough." "It is not enough," I would tell her. "He needs to answer for what he did to you, not just what he did to the bank accounts. If you stop now, he wins. He keeps his power over you." We tracked down Sarah Jenkins. I finally convinced her to speak. When she walked into that courtroom, shaking like a leaf, and told her story, the air in the room changed. The jury saw the pattern. They saw the monster behind the mask. The verdict came in on a rainy Tuesday in June. Guilty on all counts. Aggravated domestic battery, unlawful restraint, wire fraud, money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 15 years. When the gavel came down, Julian didn't look at the judge. He looked at Maya. He mouthed something. I think it was, "I love you." Maya didn't flinch. She looked right through him, as if he were made of glass. Recovery is not a straight line. It is a messy, spiraling path. For the first year, Maya didn't touch her cello. She flinched at loud noises. She had nightmares. She couldn't wear scarves because the sensation of something around her neck caused panic attacks. I didn't push her. I just stayed. I made tea. I listened. I continued my work at the archives, filing away the secrets of the city, but now with a different understanding of the weight they carried. One evening, about 18 months after the arrest, I was in the kitchen making dinner. I heard a sound. It was a low, mournful note, then another, then a chord. I walked to the living room doorway. Maya was sitting with her cello. She wasn't playing a classical piece. She was improvising a raw, jagged, haunting melody that sounded like winter turning into spring. She had her eyes closed. She was playing her pain. And in playing it, she was letting it go. 3 years have passed since that night in the penthouse. Maya is 30 now. She teaches music at a community center for at-risk youth. She tells them that their voices matter, that their art is a weapon against the darkness. She isn't married, and she isn't dating. She says she is learning to date herself, to fall in love with who she is when she isn't being pruned and controlled. As for me, I'm still at the precinct. I'm still the invisible woman in the basement, but things have changed. Younger officers come to me now, not just for files, but for advice. They know, somehow, that the old archivist sees things they miss. Julian Thorne is in a medium-security prison downstate. I heard through the grapevine that he's having a hard time. He's not the big man on campus anymore. He's just another number. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the nature of justice. We think of it as a scale, a balance. But I've learned that justice is more like a garden. You have to weed it. You have to protect it from pests. You have to get your hands dirty. And sometimes you have to burn the whole field down to let something new grow. I never told anyone else about the unauthorized access to the financial files. I broke the law to save my daughter. Technically, I committed a felony to catch a felon. Do I regret it? Not for a single second. There is a lesson here, one that I hope you carry with you. The world will tell you to be quiet. It will tell you to mind your own business. It will tell you that family matters are private, that bruises are accidents, that powerful men are untouchable. Do not believe it. If you see something, say something. If you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, trust it. We are the keepers of each other's safety. We are the archivists of the truth. Last Sunday, Maya came over for dinner. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress. She brought a new man with her, not a boyfriend, just a friend, a fellow musician named David. He was quiet, kind, and he had calluses on his fingers from playing the guitar. We sat on the back porch, eating grilled chicken and corn. Maya laughed at something David said, and it was the old laugh, the one that filled the room, the one that shook her whole body. David looked at her with genuine admiration, not possession. "Can I get you anything, Maya?" he asked. She smiled, leaning back in her chair, closing her eyes to the sun. "No," she said. "I have everything I need." And as I watched her, I realized she was right. She had her music, she had her voice, she had her freedom. And she had a mother who would burn the world down for her, again and again, if she ever had to. But for now, the fire is out. the silence is broken, and the only sound in our house is the music of a life reclaimed.